As we continue our series in lessons from a legendary leader, we are transitioning today. Most of the series we have been looking at really sort of negative lessons or bad lessons that we learned from Solomon. And the next few weeks we're going to be looking at good lessons. So we may end up on an upswing. That would be great because Solomon has taught us a lot of things not to do as we've looked at in this series, but today we're going to begin talking about some of the things that he influences us in a good or a positive way. And the first way we're going to talk about is in our speech, our words as a communicator. The impact of becoming an effective communicator is powerful. Communication can be, though, just as destructive as it is beneficial. Solomon's own words said, "From a wise man comes wise speech. The words of the wise are persuasive." They really are. And as we talked about Wednesday night in our series in Ephesians chapter 5, men and women can particularly be guilty of saying the wrong things at the wrong time or in marriage that can have quite an impact on their marriage. They can say the wrong thing. They can say nothing, which can be just as bad. And some people actually believe, as I pointed out Wednesday night, that women are right brain dominant, that is the feeling side of the brain, and most men are left brain dominant, which is the factual, analytical side of the brain, and that creates a number of communication barriers that can be very challenging. According to communication experts, while most women speak an average of 25 to 50,000 words a day, most men only speak 12,000 to 25,000 words a day. So that creates a lot of misconnections, you may say. And one of the greatest needs of people in marriage or in any relationship is to feel connected, not to feel misconnected. So without effective two-way communication, the connection felt in a relationship earlier, marriage or otherwise, can begin to dissipate. And before long, people don't feel connected at all. And Solomon has a lot to say to us about that. I mean, a whole lot. Because what we say and how we say it can have a life-changing impact on other people. And I mean, Solomon's talking about every aspect of our communication there. Our words, our tone of voice, our gestures, our facial expressions, our body language, our spirit, our timing, all the non-verbal communication that can frame our conversations as well. So Solomon is going to have an awful lot to say about how our words and our speech impact our life, either for the good or the bad. And we can learn some tremendous lessons from him in this area. You know, your communication can extinguish anger or it can escalate it. And that's what Proverbs 15:1, written by Solomon, said. A gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. Whenever we're angry, or whenever we encounter someone who is angry, we all have a choice to make. Right then, immediately, we have a choice to make. Do we want to turn the heat up and fuel the fire? Or do we want to turn down the heat and extinguish the flames? Now, our natural inclination, or most of us, our natural inclination is to follow the path of least resistance, which means we just strike back immediately without thinking. If I'm the angry person, my natural inclination then is to just let my anger spin on out of control. If someone else is angry as they confront us, our natural inclination is to return like for like. If they're using cutting remarks, we'll attempt to cut them down. If they raise their voice or yell, and you probably have been in so many circumstances where you know this is true. If they raise their voice or yell, we raise our voice louder. Unfortunately, according to Solomon, responding to anger with anger only intensifies and escalates the damage. But as he's saying in this passage, we don't have to follow our natural inclinations. We can throw cold water on our anger or anyone else's by simply injecting kind words, a soft tone of voice, gentleness in our tone, in our approach. Now, my wife and children and grandchildren would readily tell you I can lose my temper as easily as the next person, as easily as any of you. However, I really try as soon as I'm happening to hear Solomon's proverb echoing in my ear. A soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. And then I have to make a choice. Do I continue to use harsh words and escalate the anger, or do I choose calming words and a soft tone of voice and more gentle gestures? And nearly every time that I turn to softness, anger has been dispelled. Nearly every time. When I am the one angered and someone responds to me with a soft word, a gentle answer, nearly always I am calmed. When someone else is angry at me, it may take a minute or so of such effort to calm them down, but rarely more than that. But I can guarantee you this, what Solomon says here is true. Any escalation of the anger from me only fans the fire into flames. That's what he's telling us here. We have our 4 grandchildren together a lot at our house. And when we do, rarely does, I started saying an hour, rarely does 15 minutes go by without an argument breaking out, a fight of some kind. And I never cease to be amazed at how quickly they calm down when I walk into the center of them and speak softly. If I scream at them from the other room, or if I come in, because I'm a lot bigger than them, if I come in waving my arms and yelling, I won't get the same response, because we generally turn like from like. Or I'll get a response of utter fear, and nobody responds well to utter fear. But if I simply walk into the disagreement very calmly and say, let's find a solution here that everybody can live with, it almost always works. Why does it work? Because I do it? Nope. Why it works is because Solomon said do it. A gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. Now, a quick word of caution there. If you have done something that the other person considers extremely offensive, they may see your initial efforts to speak in softer language and a softer tone of voice as a form of condescension or a denial that you have any responsibility in the reason that they are mad. And that's where your choice of words and your inflection and your body language all must show that you understand the degree of the problem and you have a sincere desire to make it right. Best biblical example I've ever seen of this is in 1 Samuel chapter 26, when a scoundrel named Nabal infuriated King David, the most powerful man in the world at the time, with his rudeness. And David and his men were on the way to Nabal's house to kill him. and to kill all his servants. And Nadal's wife, Abigail, diffused the entire situation. She met David and his men on the road to their house and got out and fell to her knees and begged forgiveness for, in her words, her idiot husband. And she praised the king for what a great man and what a great job he was doing. And it totally deflected the entire situation. She saved her husband from a beat down by approaching David with soft words. It has been said, diplomacy is the art of telling your friend that he has an open mind instead of a hole in his head. That's two different ways of saying the same thing. Or even worse, as Churchill said, diplomacy is the art of telling people to go to hell in such a way that they ask for directions. And he could do that. How you say what you say can make a huge difference. Solomon's also going to tell us that our communication can wound others or can heal them. In Proverbs 12:18, we read 16, a fool is quick-tempered, but the wise person stays calm when insulted. Sometimes when people throw verbal daggers at us, the cuts are inflicted subtly. They're not deep, they're subtle, by tone of voice or implication. At other times, they're hurled with real force. Sometimes parents, when treating their children, or disciplining their children, excuse their own extremely harsh words by claiming they were just telling the truth, and so if the truth hurts, so be it. I would just advise you to be careful about that. Something can be the truth and can hurt, but be communicated in a different way so that the truth is spoken both in love and in truth, as Ephesians 4:15 says. Therefore, speaking the truth in love, we will grow up in all things in him. Speak the truth, sure, but speak it in love. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I guarantee you we'd have 75 to 90% minimum if I were to ask the question, how many of you can remember a specific criticism that you received from your parents when you were a child and it deeply hurt you and you remember it to this day? I bet it'd be at least 75 to 90%. It might be closer to 100. And that's with your parents. I absolutely know in marriage it's true. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that story with people repeating things that a partner said to them in marriage 10, 20, 30 years ago that has never been confessed or forgiven. And it just sort of sits there in their life. That's how powerful, hurtful words can be. Their imprint on one's mind may not ever be erased. Solomon says that a wise man or woman will use communication to bring healing and health to other people. I mean, we have this verse in Proverbs 16:24. He says, pleasant words are as a honeycomb, sweet to the soul, health to the bones. Earlier in Proverbs 12:25, he says, heaviness in the heart of a man makes it stoop, but a good word makes it glad. Words of praise and appreciation and encouragement and understanding can penetrate one's mind and heal one's very soul. And that's what Solomon is telling us in this multiplicity of verses in the book of Proverbs about how to control our communication, our tongue. Some people make cutting remarks, but the words of the wise bring healing, Solomon said. Kind words are like honey, sweet to the soul and healthy for the body. Worry weighs a person down. An encouraging word cheers a person up. I love this little poem that I found that said, one little unshed raindrop may think it's too small, but somewhere a thirsty flower awaits its fall. One little word unspoken may seem too small to say, but somewhere for that one word, a heart might pray. Sometimes all it takes is you giving one positive, good word to somebody. Change their life. Absolutely change their life. Your communication can infuse life into a person's spirit. That's what Solomon says in Proverbs 15:4. Gentle words are a tree of life. A deceitful tongue crushes the spirit. I love this expression because trees, of course, I love the fact that he uses trees here. Because trees, of course, are not only alive, but they provide life to others. Their leaves provide us with oxygen to breathe. Their fruit provides us with food to eat. Their roots provide stability to our soil. They're so important to us, to our ecosystem, and to our ability to live. And the same, he says here, is true of a person who communicates with healing words. His encouraging communication improves not only his life, his own life, but the lives of people around him. Try it, you'll see it. You'll see it's true. But you'll also see the opposite is true. Communication that is deceitful, Solomon says in this verse, can just crush someone's spirit. When we communicate in a way that is deceitful, dishonest, vicious, we run the risk of literally breaking a person's spirit. When a person's spirit is broken by another, not only does the relationship suffer, but the person can be emotionally scarred forever. Many years ago, a close friend of mine that I went to Lipscomb with divorced her husband after multiple years of physical and verbal abuse. What particularly struck me in talking with her was that she claimed the verbal abuse was worse on her than the physical abuse. Sort of stunned me. I said, yeah, how's that work? And she said, well, the physical bruises and cuts only hurt a minute, may have healed in a matter of days. But the emotional pain and scars, they're still with me today. Throughout our lives, we are faced with opportunities to communicate in ways that either foster healing or inflict pain. Most people, even those of you who are sitting in this room this morning, really have no idea just how much power resides in what they say and how they say it. And have very little realization how long it stays in the mind and the heart of other people. So choose your words, Solomon said, and how you frame them wisely. Because he then says, it's not just good life, bad life. It can actually be a matter of life and death. The tongue can bring death or life. And those who love to talk will reap the consequences. So when I was writing this, I'm always about 3 weeks ahead. And when I was writing this, I had just seen a story about the 20th anniversary of an event that happened in 2005, June of 2005 in Atlanta, Georgia. And some of you will remember this, where this man Brian Nichols walked into an Atlanta courtroom, shot the judge, shot several other people. I think 3, I believe, were killed. And then he fled the courtroom and he started on the run. And he happened to run into this woman's home and hold her hostage. And it was a touch and go situation for hours. The police figured out he was there. They surrounded the home. And the woman started telling him about her life. She had been a drug addict. She started telling him about how she was reading The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren, and that it had brought a new hope and vision and purpose to her life. She asked if she could read a passage to him, and Brian Nichols said yes. And she read the passage, and he began to have tears, and it brought about a dynamic change in the heart and mind of the guy who had just murdered people and taken her captive. Her words not only saved her life, but they saved his life because he surrendered. And who knows how many other lives that night might have been lost had he not peacefully surrendered to the police. I mean, if you want to know the truth of the tongue can bring death or life, there it is for you in a real life situation, in a real life story. So there's an example of the tongue can bring life literally from death. Let me give you another example. How many of you know this man? He used to be a member here over 20 years ago. If you know him, raise your hand. How many of you know him? 1, 2, 3. Is that really it? 4. Wow, how we have changed. Because this is one of the most influential men who has ever attended our church. In fact, he's he's the most influential man maybe I've ever met. He was a five-star executive for the Shop and Go countries. He was a Fortune 500 executive. His name was John Johnston. He wound up serving the longest term of anybody ever on the board at Lipscomb University. And he was one of our members, and it was just like having this bright ray of shining light walk in every time that smile was frozen on his face. He never was angry with anybody, never got mad. And all the years he had an office at our church building on McGregor Boulevard. I never saw him mad, never saw him say anything bad about anybody else. He was always counseling people, he was always helping people with wisdom and finances. I used to say, when he died about 10 years ago in Nashville, Tennessee, Walt Lever at the church where John was attending, Brentwood Hills in Nashville, Walt Lever called me and said, I need you to tell me something to say about John. And I said, all right, I'll tell you exactly what to say. Because we did this, you could put 500 people in one room, and you could put John Johnston in the other room, and you'd get more good ideas out of John Johnston's room than you would the other 500. And that was the truth. That's how powerful, positive, upbeat he was in all of his words. You just could not be around him for a second without thinking you were the most important person in the whole world. He spent a lifetime using his words to bring life to others, highlighting the truth of that verse that we just read. Proverbs 25:11 that Solomon wrote is pretty well known. Timely advice is lovely, like golden apples in a silver basket. Have you ever seen a beautiful painting or photograph that just stopped you dead in your tracks? Imagine with me, after we talked earlier in this series about Solomon being the wealthiest man in the world and the wisest man in the world, imagine with me the incredible works of art that must have filled Solomon's palace. And judging from this proverb, I bet he had one particular piece of art that was his favorite, a picture or a sculpture crafted in silver, decorated with apples of gold. You remember how fond he was of gold. Yet as beautiful and desirable as that picture might have been, Solomon says that speaking the right words at the right time to the right person is even more beautiful, even more worthwhile, even more meaningful. And we all can do that. Look, he's not giving us a task here or homework here that is impossible for us to do. We all can do that. We all have the ability to provide such words of love and kindness and encouragement and wisdom to other people. It's within every one of us. But just to be sure you know that, he's going to go on and tell us a number of ways we can do that. Speak in such a way that you make others want to listen. Proverbs 15:2 says, "The tongue of the wise makes knowledge appealing, but the mouth of a fool belches out foolishness." Belches out foolishness. I like that. For most people, speaking simply means saying whatever they feel like saying. People say what they think or feel as they think or feel it, regardless of its validity or appropriateness. I had to learn early on, very early on in life, because I began preaching at 22, that I couldn't do that. I just couldn't I couldn't say whatever I thought. I mean, I had to filter my words somewhat, as opposed to most people. Whenever you have something that you really want the person to clearly understand and embrace, you need to communicate it in a way that makes it palatable. A wise man or woman does whatever it takes to make what they have to say easy to swallow, rather than making them belch. There's a translation, modern translation of that verse. And then you have to learn how to be persuasive. Proverbs 16:23 says, "From the wise mind comes wise speech." The words of the wise, wisest man who ever lived saying this, the words of the wise are persuasive. In other words, don't talk every time you feel like talking. From a wise man comes wise speech. Don't talk every time you feel like talking. Take control of what you say. Learn when to speak and when not to speak. Think about what to speak and what to say before you open your mouth. Some people it's very easy. For other people, it is very, very difficult. One obvious benefit is that when you are not talking, you are listening. And listening is the only time you are learning. Think about it in that way. And the second half of Solomon's injunction in this proverb tells us that our speech needs to be persuasive. Now, sometimes when I say persuasive, some of you are going to hear manipulative. No, two different words. He didn't say our speech needs to be manipulative. He said it needs to be persuasive. Manipulation uses any means possible, including deceit or force, to convince someone to do something that is not in their best interest. Persuasion, on the other hand, allows you to present your point of view in a clear and compelling way to motivate someone to do what is in their best interest or is in the interest of the common good. We need persuasive people. We need persuasive politicians. We need persuasive teachers. We need persuasive preachers. We don't need manipulative preachers. We don't need manipulative politicians. We don't need manipulative teachers. And then he tells us something else. I'll just sum that up in 3 words by saying, listen before speaking. Spouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish. Any of you ever had anybody in your life, when you're trying to say something, they interrupt you and Try to finish your thought for you. Anybody? I mean, and it's often jumping to the wrong conclusion too. That's what he's saying here. Listen before speaking. And then just for the sake of making sure we get through everything, be slow to speak and guard your words carefully. Proverbs 29:20 says there's more hope for a fool than for someone who speaks without thinking. And then you remember James 1:19. Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, and I want you to read the rest of the verse with me aloud, please. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get... I didn't hear you real good, so I think we'll just start right over there. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Now, you know, that is such marvelous advice for communication. And yet, you know what we almost always do? The exact opposite. You can pretty well reverse that, and we do the exact opposite. We're slow to listen, quick to speak, and quick to get angry. Wouldn't you say the majority of people in the world do this exactly backwards? Exactly backwards. They're slow to listen, quick to speak, quick to get angry. And that's part of what's wrong with our world. Why was the wisest and richest man who ever lived so repetitive and insistent that we guard our mouth and be slow to speak? I think it's because as king, he sat in the company of a lot of wise men who pretended to be wise, but their words really exposed them as fools. I'm sure he witnessed many who were quick to speak, but speak foolishly. And once words leave our lips, they can never be retracted. I mean, you can't retract words that leave your... You can better go try to erase all of your history on the internet than you can try to retract words. You can't retract them. They're there. Solomon, more than anybody else, seemed to know the incredible power that words will carry. He said, those who control their tongue will have a long life. Opening your mouth can ruin everything. And we have all known men and women whose unwise words have opened their mouth and ruined everything and gotten them fired or destroyed their careers or their homes. Never tear others down, rather build them up, Solomon's advice to us. Some people make cutting remarks, but the words of the wise bring healing. You know, it's so easy to say things that are cutting or hurtful to others, whether we say it to their face or behind their back. And we rationalize that with this excuse, well, everybody else does it too. But there's nothing innocent about cutting another person with a sword, and speech can be a sword. And that's exactly what Solomon says we're doing when we cut somebody down with words. A wise man, he says, repeatedly uses words to build others up, to heal their wounds, to fortify their self-esteem. The natural inclination of the sinful man, the person who doesn't have the Holy Spirit of God living in their life, is to join in on the office gossip or the church gossip or use angry words to defend ourselves when under attack. Solomon urges us to choose to act contrary to our natural inclinations, refusing at all to participate in speech that may hurt someone else. He urges us to replace negative words with positive ones. If somebody is gossiping about another person, why not try, instead of joining in, you don't have to confront it. You don't have to confront that and make a bigger fight. Why not choose to say something positive about that person? I've done that. I've had it done in circles where I was having a conversation. It changes the entire tone of the conversation. You know, group dynamics are an interesting thing. Danny, Jack, close your ears. Alan, close your ears. Don't want any of the elders to hear this because group dynamics does an amazing thing. If I really, really want something in an elders meeting, I will tell Sean or one of them in advance, don't let that lay out there very long. Jump on it and be all for it. Because the simple truth of the matter is, if one or two people jump on something first, it's hard for the other people in the room to disagree with them. That's just the way group dynamics work. So let's apply that to this. I'm telling you, I've watched it work, and I have practiced it with others. A little bit of gossip starts over here, and it starts going, and I say, me or somebody else says, but that person really, I just love what they did over here in VBS. I just love that, they've got a really good heart and really good spirit. Cuts it off at the knees. Because of group dynamics, people don't want to criticize or attack the one who just said that. And it becomes words that bring healing. You'll be amazed at how quickly the conversation turns from the negative to the positive. And then stop while you are ahead. Proverbs 10:19 says, too much talk leads to sin. Be sensible and keep your mouth shut. Many people, once they start talking, have a hard time stopping. I'm one of them. Solomon warns that when you keep talking after you've made your point, I've known some situations where I made my point and then talked my people right out of the point I'd made. Kept talking too much. Solomon warns that when you keep talking after you've made your point, you're likely to say something really foolish. Make your point briefly and then be silent. Proverbs 17:28 says that truth to us. Even fools are thought wise when they keep silent. With their mouths shut, they seem intelligent. We know Abraham Lincoln was a big reader of the Bible. We do know that. And so compare this verse with what Lincoln was well known for saying. Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. Very comparable, isn't it? Even fools are thought wise when they keep silent. When their mouths are shut, they seem intelligent. We have all known that to be true. We have all known people that when we first met them and spoke briefly with them, we thought, they're pretty sharp. They're pretty intelligent. And then the more they talked, the more we thought, something ain't quite right there. That's what Solomon was saying. That's what Lincoln was saying. The Greek philosopher Plato once said, wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something. Big difference between the two. Talk a lot, likely to talk yourself into trouble. There's wisdom in being a man of few words, like the old owl. A wise old owl sat on the oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Why aren't we like that wise old bird? Pretty true. Solomon also tells us to always speak truthfully. Hiding hatred makes you a liar. Slandering others makes you a fool. Outright lying seems to... I grew up in a time period where you just didn't lie, and if you did, you were called on it. You were absolutely called on it. And I'm talking about at home, at school, at church, in the community, in politics. If you lied, you were called on it. Outright lying today just seems to be persuasive. And when people lie, they think they are outwitting the other person. Not true, according to Solomon. It is never a good idea to lie. So if lying is foolishness, telling the truth is smart. It creates a foundation of integrity that we can build our life and our reputation upon. Telling the truth shows our spouses, our children, our friends, our employers, our peers, our fellow church members that they can truly rely on us. Everyone enjoys a fitting reply, Solomon said in Proverbs 15. It is wonderful to say the right thing at the right time. And as I read that passage, I could not help but think of good old Jackie Gleason, who always used to say how sweet it is when everybody says the right thing at the right time. When we do that, that's called a win-win. And it's one of the most important lessons that we can ever learn from a legendary leader.